All right, so we have a grower panel of participants that were in the pilot project, and I want to ask them some questions, and then they're going to have a discussion, and then I want you guys to ask them a question because they participated in it. They know how the program works. So I'd like to call up Jeff Krohn, Dwight Bartle, and Brad Kamprath. If you guys want to come up here and have a seat, we're going to get started. I got to change over presentations here in just a second. Yeah, I got to give them a mic, right.
You got one?
Nope, I need that one for them, yep.
Share the mic.
All right, well, thanks, guys. Is that microphone on?
Yes, test.
Good, perfect. Okay, well, thank you guys for being willing to come up here and answer some questions. I think I'll get things kicked off with just some questions first, but then I want to turn it over to you guys, and I want you guys to grill them and ask them some really tough questions. They're prepared to answer the toughest of questions. They will solve all of your problems, I promise you, okay? They've given me assurance that they can do that. But, all right, so first question, and I don't care who answers, but I want all three of you to answer. First question, why is the EN project valuable to your farm? And use the microphone, please.
Okay, so the EN project, I guess, really brings a detailed look at your crop. Like Dennis said, there's so many elements that they pick from your crop as far as weather and soil, tissue sampling, and then testing the grain when it's done to see how many nutrients are in it or percent of nutrients that's in it. And you can compare that to everybody that's in the program. Now, you don't know whose is whose because of names, disclosure and that kind of thing, but it just really brings the most detailed items of your crop that you're growing that any crop anybody's doing out there. So when they started this in Europe, I really think that they knew it was a good program, and it's something that we really need to build on for everybody. Share what you're doing and try to get a better crop out there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think everybody has their own special way that they grow the wheat. And, you tried a product here a few years ago and, geez, it seems to work. Well, you never go back and test it again. And with this program, it's going in there, pulling your lead tissue samples, and it's letting you know, geez, I put extra of this on. Is it showing up? We've never gone into checking ourselves as much as this program is. And so I think right there, and I know in my own situation, I'm starting to rethink what I've been doing because of what I'm seeing on my test results versus everybody else's. So I think in the long run, and it was a pilot program, it's just starting, but I think it opens your eyes up. Are we doing enough? Is there something else we can do? Are we doing too much? So I think it's a great deal.
I'll second all that. These guys said, so you can get into a lot of details with certain things, on your end rates. These guys are putting on 100 pounds. Well, I'm putting 120. Is that really, what I need to do? You can get into some more of the details of each element. You're all the way from your seeding rate all the way to your test weight in the end, and what can affect that. Personally, I did a micronutrient in mine on a foliar feed. It showed up on my test results. So we saw results from what I did. Whether that had an effect on my yield, I'm not sure yet. But you can try different things and see if you see something in the end.
All right, thanks, guys. Second question, What is the most important thing you learned from the Yield Enhancement Network pilot project?
Okay, the most important thing that I learned, I wrote some notes down here, is the different yield potential for different soils. If you look at the entire program and all of the different, it has a bar graph on the report. There's a page that has a bar graph on there, and on the bar graph shows what everybody's yield potential was. And I look at ours, and we hit, I don't know, was it 72% of our yield potential? I thought that was pretty poor, but it was first. We got the highest. Some of these yield potentials are 260 bushel to the acre, and that's based a lot on, all the scenarios, but also on soil types. So it's something that we really need to be looking at is, what is the potential of your soil, and then kind of work towards that also of identifying what that is. But this program helps you identify what's your potential of your soil. So that was one of the biggest things that I learned from this is yield potential based on different soil types.
Yeah, I should have took your notes. Yeah, definitely. That's something that, every field is not going to average. I have an unwritten rule. I want to hit 150 bushel wheat, and I've done it once. But every acre isn't going to do that. And with this information that we're getting back, there's just a tremendous amount of information. Some we don't even know how to utilize yet. And you can see, we're going to learn what our limiting factors on growing wheat are. I think we're going to find out a lot of relationships between a lot of the chemicals that we use, the fertilizers that we use. I think this thing is going to be wide open in the future. What we're really going, we don't understand yet what we're going to gain from this, I don't think.
Yeah, again, I'll second this. I think Dennis is crazy when he comes up with these yield potentials. That's what I learned. Dennis is absolutely nuts. When he tells me I can get 230 bushel wheat, there's no way in the world, Dennis. But, we've seen it. Europe is telling us, hey, you know what, we can do this. We're doing it here. We're a little different than they are, but, down the road, we got to set our sights a lot higher.
Do you know what the world record yield is for wheat? Any ideas?
60?
Anybody have any ideas? 220s? It's right around 260. It was in the 250s, I think. What country? I believe that was New Zealand. Yes, New Zealand.
Not that we found.
So the potential is there for the crop to hit that. Okay, so we know that it can be done. Whether we can hit that or not, I don't know. And what are they doing there that's different about us? That's why we're trying to do this project. We want to know what's going on different here, that they can get that and we're not getting it right now. So, any other comments, you guys?
I think we're going to find out new things that we have to overcome. I mean, what's the biggest thing that we worry about our wheat? Going down. I mean, anybody can grow 200 bushel wheat. It won't stand up for us. And so I think this program, we're going to find out how to get better yields. Somewhere along the line, we're going to have to find out how to make this wheat stand up. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that's going to come out eventually as we move forward.
Any other comments before we move on to the next question? All right, question in the back. Go ahead. And Monica Jean is Extension Educator, Field Crops with MSU Extension. She has a microphone. And then Amara Jackson in the back, State FFA President. She has a microphone too. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We do want to use the microphones so that way, because the recording, that way we'll pick up the audio that you can hear it on the recording. So go ahead.
Is there any study going on of chemicals that we're currently using, how it's affecting the yields of wheat? Is there some chemicals that may be deterring our wheat yield loss right now? I mean, is there any study going on that? I just wonder if we're doing in chemicals, we're hurting ourselves somewhat.
Yeah, so good question. There's a lot of studies going on about the use of fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, even plant growth regulators on wheat. And there's almost a plethora of data out there. And sometimes, yes, those things, particularly herbicide, we had some damage last year when we applied, because if you recall back in April, it was kind of cold. The first part of April was decent. And then as we started to approach that Feek 6, which the timing of when some of those herbicides are you can't go past Feek 6. So we made some applications when it was cold out, and we damaged the crop a little bit. So yes, some of that can happen, but yet on the other hand, if you don't put the herbicide out there, how much yield loss you're going to have from weeds? So we got to figure out that balance. So there's a lot of research going on, and I don't know that we have like a solid conclusion yet on that. Question back here.
Right behind you. You have one over here too, by the way. Dennis.
Oh, okay, thank you. We'll get to you next.
What about prior chemicals, like you plant the wheat after soybeans or after corn, the minute carryover?
Yeah, so carryover can also be a concern, particularly in dry years or when you have like extreme pHs in the soil. So particularly in those years, we do have to be concerned about that. The labels on all the products have what their crop rotation restrictions are. You got to be reading them and make sure you're following them, because there are some products that can cause carryover. So when you're trying to plant wheat in the fall, and if it's a little bit late, you don't want anything hindering that. So yeah, there could be some of that going on. Question over here.
As far as varieties, is there any study or breakout on it, whether there's commercial or proprietary varieties versus the old open source varieties?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variety trial work. In fact, we test 115 different varieties of wheat every year. Those include public lines and private lines. So we have a lot of data on that published on our variety trials website at Michigan State University. So. Oh, within the N program. So no, we haven't done any of that kind of stuff in the N program yet. We had just one pilot year, and we only have 43 farms from one growing season. So to really draw any conclusions, we're real early in this process. We're not really able to draw conclusions yet about some of these questions you're asking. Question back here.
I can ask a question, but do you want me to wait until they finish the last question? All right, I'll hold mine then.
Okay. Do you guys have any comments about what the things that they brought up here?
Just a thing on your variety. I mean, they did say, five people had Pioneer wheat and 7 people had, this variety and things like that, but they didn't specifically divide that out for your yields and things, but they did let us know what varieties were planted.
All right, any other questions right now? If not, I'm going to move on.
How many people here think that there might be a little bit of yield drag if you spray your wheat like in the spring and you're going by the book or carryover? My personal opinion, if I don't have to spray my wheat in the spring for herbicides, I think I gain a little bit. Good wheat won't have weeds. But every time I spray, even though the book says you don't and all your chemical companies say it's safe, I have my best yields when I don't have to spray my wheat. So, and I wonder about carryover. I grow sugar beets. Some of these chemicals you can't grow, beets for years later. Yeah, how much effect is that doing on the wheat? I'm not trying to badmouth any chemical company or anything, but I think if we can keep everything to the minimum, I think there's merit in that. And then I'll say that, and somebody will have a disaster in their wheat field, and it'll go down, and the stuff will green up, and that's, yeah. But, you can sue me later.
Any other comments? Any other questions from the audience right now? Let's go back here first, and then I'll head over there.
Did any of you use growth regulator?
Yes, we did.
I'm looking at my wife. What is it, Nance?
Palisade?
No, no. We use it's not, I don't know if it's a growth regulator.
Oh,
Yell it out. No. From CPS. From CPS. Radiant. We use a product called Radiant, supposed to help the, you know, the root development and everything, and they call that a PGR. So.
I did not use one this past year, but have looked at obviously have looked at it, and this program kind of shed some light on that too. That I probably will try it next year.
We've used growth regulators since it first come out. Palisade is the one we've been using. Kind of backed off on the rates with it a little bit. It's really weather sensitive. You got to be super careful with it. You get some cold weather. Last year was a terrible struggle trying to get it applied, and when we had decent growing conditions, because our cool spring just kind of hung on and hung on, wheat kept on kind of growing. It likes that weather, but you really got to watch your cold weather with Palisade, from my observation.
question over here?
Yeah, what kind of soil preparations, timing, you know, are we no-tilling, minimum tilling, vertical tilling? What are we trying?
Ours is 90% after dry beans, and we do a vertical tillage, a light vertical tillage, and then we plant with a Pottinger 5-inch planter. So it's not no-till, but trying to do the least amount of tillage as possible.
We've been on a program. I use some of the Herbrooks, you know, chicken pellets, and we try to go in there with like 1,000, 1,200 pounds, and then we go ahead and we just work it in with a finishing tool just to throw a little bit of dirt on it. We're not putting enough of the manure on to really give it much credit far as the nutrients, but we're doing it for soil health. I think there's got to be something out there besides more nitrogen. If it was that, we'd have figured that out a long time ago. And we've been doing that for a few years now. Like I said, with the chicken manure, you really can't handle what Mother Nature is going to release at the right time. So if you put too much on, you get the right spring, your wheat's going to go down. We've tried that when we was working with the Palisade through the extension. They wanted wheat to go down for we could see if the product was going to work. Well, I know how to make wheat go down. And so, you know, to put on more than that, I'd be scared of it. But we're doing it for soil health. There's got to be something about this soil health thing that's going to justify in the long run, and that's where we lean toward.
I only do no-till, but I'm not 100% no-till, but my wheat is all no-tilled.
That was actually the perfect lead-in to the question I had earlier, which was what data points are you collecting, if any, that quantify soil health practices?
Do you want me to answer that, or?
None. No, it's something that needs to be looked at 100%.
So to address that question, that came up in the project, and University of Guelph has a grant project where they're going to collect soil health samples and report data back for the Ontario growers this year as kind of a pilot project. We're still trying to figure out how would we do this across the whole network. So they have a project where they're willing to collect the samples from the yen participants in Ontario. So we're going to explore that this year and see what we can learn and figure out how to do that maybe across the whole network in the following year. So I saw another question.
I'd like to add something to that, Dennis.
Oh,
Just a second.
just a second.
So I want to add on to what Dwight had brought up too here with soil health. And our particular field that we had our trial in this last year has some of our lowest soil tests of any of our farms. Phosphorus is in the teens, potassium is in the 90s parts per million, now we're talking. And so we put some potash on, all variable rate P and K in the fall prior to planting. And wondering, how it would come out in the end. Well, part of the items that they're testing for is they taking the grain and then basically dissecting the grain of how much phosphorus is in the grain, how much potassium is in the grain. And I printed off, and you guys can't see this here, but our numbers compared to the top 10% of the guys in the program, ours are way above it. How much phosphorus is in the grain at harvest time, how much potash is in the grain. So it tells me that soil health has a big component of this. It's pulling, the plant has a capability of pulling these nutrients out of the soil, even though the soil tests are very, very low. And we put a little bit of fertilizer on too. But to me, it opened up my eyes of that soil health is a big component of this, and it needs to be part of the program too.
Are you doing any testing to find out whether tilling or no tilling it in the fall or working the ground cuts down on the weeds in the spring?
I think so. I'll work with the finishing.
Use the microphone. Yeah. Thanks.
I think so. Like I said, I work everything with a finishing tool, just to knock out your mare's tail and that type of thing. Yeah. So I mean, I like to use as less chemicals as possible. There's burn downs and all that stuff, but we hit it once, and then we plant.
We also hit it once with light tillage, and if we get good early growth and plant it early, and we do still have some early fall annuals, winter annuals come in, we definitely try to spray it in the fall rather than the spring, if we need to spray it at all for weed control.
And most of the time in the fall, I don't do any spraying. I do some in the spring. 9 times out of 10, I do a herbicide in the spring. I've done it in the fall a few times. It's worked very well, but most of the time it's in the spring.
Okay, question back
What
there.
type of soils do y'all have?
Mostly sandy loam.
Basically, we got CECs from 7 to 15. So mostly it's your Park Hill loams and your K-Pack loams. But we got a variety, just like everybody.
And we're all over the board too. It's from low sand to clay.
Okay, next.
Question is, what kind of rotations you use to get your best start on your wheat? What do you grow? What crops do you grow?
I do we're a 3-year rotation, corn, beans, and wheat. So we're always after soybeans is what I do.
Most of ours is after dry beans. Get the dry beans off early and plant early. I still think, the fly-free date, even though it's kind of a fictitious number, the week after that seems to be a pretty good time for us. We seem to get our best yields about a week after the fly-free date. That's up in the tip of the thumb.
We're corn, soybeans, wheat, and of course the good old sugar beets. So we try to plant after soybeans. Sometimes we will plant after sugar beets if we get an early pull. I know if you plant wheat after sugar beets, 4 or 5 days later, the wheat's not going to be as good. But if you can get in there 2 weeks later, I don't think it matters a bit.
Question over here.
More of a question for Dennis. In Europe, have they been doing it for sufficient number of years that the applicants are able to go back to their original 1.5 acres to see how they can improve from 3 years?
Right. Yes, they've been doing this project since 2012. So they do have some repeat on the same farm or the same ground. So yes, they're able to look at that. In fact, some of them have it approaching the third rotation, so the third time back in the same field. Their crop rotation is a little different over there. They don't grow all the same crops we do here, but. Yeah, so have they seen an improvement? Yes, they have, and that's what, so what they're doing, they've collected enough data now to where, you know, we have this green line that shows up on these box plots. That's the top 10% of our growers in this project. Their green line is a benchmark that they say, if you're not at this number, you are deficient in whatever it is. You need to get your number up above that. We don't have enough data collected to make those, you know, determine those benchmarks yet. But that's the goal. That's where we want to go. They've got 450 people in their yen project, and it took, I don't know how long it took to build up to that, but they have way more data points than what we have. So they're able to do that. But that is exactly where we want to go. Question over here?
Hi. Have you guys responded to seeding rate based on what you started learning? Like, have you had the guts to put fewer seeds or more seeds, I guess, whichever way?
Yes, absolutely. We've been messing around with seeding rates on our farm for quite a few years, and we're actually down to less than 1 million seeds when we're planting very early. Now our plot here, we planted at 1.08 million seeds. It was planted kind of mid-season. But what we're really trying to do is get, you know, the plant to throw 3 or 4 tillers in the fall, plant it thinner, and save some seed money, you know, a little bit too, but trying to get a more uniform crop to grow, just like our other crops, just like corn. You want corn all to emerge on the same day within 24 hours. Same thing with wheat. Get it planted evenly as you can, and there's no doubt in my mind that most growers are planting too much seed, my opinion. But we've seen it. You know, we were planting 3 million seeds 10 years ago. I planted down to 500,000 seeds and still have maintained very good yields. So yes, we've really reduced our seeding rate on our farm.
I haven't. Well, with us getting the soybeans off and planting the wheat, we're not planting earlier variety soybeans. We're sticking with a 2 to a 2-1. I still want yield on my soybeans. So we've stuck with the 1.6 to 1.8. And I guess one thing about this yen program, I mean, I'm looking at my drill and my wheat, and yeah, this thing's cost me money because I ordered a new drill. Just because I can see we're not doing a good enough job with the drill that we had. But, you know, I think a lot of it, planting early, is weather dependent. We're not getting that opportunity usually to plant wheat the 15th of September. Usually right around that 1st of October range, and you know, we bump the drill as we go. I mean, we start a little bit and we bump it up as we're getting later, but it seems that 1.6, 1.8 is where we're gonna stick to.
So I guess he didn't change his. This box and whisker graph that we get, I think is very helpful because my seeding rate, I was on this top end. I was way on the top end. I might have been the top person. So, you know, I am going to adjust my rates just because of that. You know, I've learned from seeing these other guys what they're planning, so I'm going to adjust my rates. I did some this past year, but we didn't get all of this data back before I planted, so I couldn't adjust it more than what I probably should have.
All right, so I've got a question back here. I saw another hand here somewhere, and then do you have one too? Let's go over here first because he's been waiting longer here, I think.
With this yen program, in the future, are you going to study irrigated wheat versus non-irrigated wheat?
So we did have, I think, 2 fields that were irrigated this last year in here. We haven't necessarily tried to put an effort into looking into that. If the growers in the network want to do that, we will do that. So I'm trying to leave this up to the participants. What do you guys want to do? What do you want to focus on? What do you want to work on? And let the group decide what direction we go. I don't feel like I have the authority or ability to say, well, you need to do this, and this is the only way we should do it. I want to do what they want to do and look at the things that they want to look at. And so the question back here on seeding rates, we've been doing a seeding rate study, seeding rate and planting date. We've been planting every 2 weeks, starting the middle of September all the way through middle of November, and we've done seeding rates from 0.8 million all the way up to 2.4 million, and the response goes like this, and it levels off. So actually it does keep going up just a little bit, but that peak is occurring right about 1.2 million. So I'll have more about that later, and we're going to talk about it in our Yen group about that a little bit more. So that's another reason why you might want to sign up. So question over here, and then I'm going to come back to you.
Okay. There was some questions earlier about spraying and crop safety, which got me thinking. Every salesman tries to convince you that their product's the best. Are you collecting data on active ingredients or product names, or just whether it was or was not sprayed?
Yes, we're collecting the active ingredients, the rate sprayed, the date, the crop growth stage when it was sprayed. We're collecting all of that information. Well, we haven't done anything with it yet, but we're collecting it. Do you guys have anything you wanted to say about that, or no? Where was my next one? Here.
Okay, so back to tillering, from what I've read, our tillering stage is from now to mid-March. And so you top producers, when you go out, let's say your third week of March or stuff, are you counting your tillers? And so my question is, if you are, and I don't know what that top number you feel of tillers you need per plant to get top yield, but if you say, let's just say it's 8, and you go out there and you count 6, do you have any idea how many bushel loss if you have less tillers, or is that kind of broke down? Anything on that?
You guys go.
So yeah, we're definitely counting tillers in our fields. The earlier you plant in the fall, obviously you're going to get more tillers. And part of our problem is, or I believe our problem is we're getting too many tillers in the fall with too early of growth. Now obviously you don't get that if you plant it in end of October or November. You don't have any tillers. Your hope is just coming out of the ground. So ideally, we like to have 4 to 5 tillers, and I'm just basing this off of the information that I've learned, and Dennis and I, when we went to Germany a couple years ago, this is where they're getting their top yields. The more tillers that you have, you get up around 10, then the root system doesn't seem to be able to support them extra tillers. So we don't have anything here that we can really stop tillering with. To try and promote more tillers, we know that good growing conditions and nitrogen in the springtime early helps promote tillering. So some of this late wheat that was planted last fall that's barely out of the ground, and if it makes it well through the winter, yeah, you want to get nitrogen on it as soon as you possibly can to help promote tillering in the fall. So what we do on our farm is in the springtime, yeah, I go out and I count tillers. And when it starts to green up, if we've got 5 or more tillers, we'll delay nitrogen on them fields. We won't put them on right away. But if we got tillers, or less than 5 tillers, 2 or 3 tillers out there, as soon as we can get on the field, we'll get nitrogen on there to try and promote more earlier tillering on them spring planted fields.
So what do you think is the ideal tillers that you could get? What do you think through research is not ideal tillers where you're going to get top yield? 10, 15, or something?
Yeah, we have a lot to learn, obviously, but from what we learned, the guys that's getting the 200 plus yields in Europe, it's around that 4, 5, 6 tillers, and they're growing evenly together. Our tillers are a nice big head, and you see some little ones off to the side down below the canopy a lot of times. They got different products that they can use to manage tillers. We don't have those here in the United States yet. our best way is to do it with early planting or nitrogen management for now. But that's what we're thinking, that's what I'm thinking, that's what I've learned and read around that 5 tillers or so.
I'm not like these guys. I shoot from the hip. I look at it. I mean, I don't dig them up and count the tillers. I just look at how much ground cover I got, what it's looking like. I try to put my nitrogen on as late as I can. And I did that. You know, Martin Nagelkirk, that's what he told me a few years back. And well, I tried, because the main thing is we want this wheat to stand up. I try to put it on just as the wheat is coming out of the vegetation stage into the elongation stage. I'm thinking myself a little bit, watching this yen thing a little bit closer. Maybe we got to split applicate or something. But what I seen this year is I had a lot of tillers, that were just little runs. And what I'm trying to do by putting it on late is to maybe even abort those. I wonder, just like a corn stalk that's got, 2 ears and one's just a little nub, you might be farther ahead just to put on one good ear. So I'm trying to eliminate the little nubs on my tiller counts. And I don't know if it's successful or not, but that's my theory behind it. But yet I'm second guessing myself, and I think we're going to change a few things this year. So yeah, don't follow me. These guys, and there's guys in the room, they count their tillers, and yeah, I shoot from the hip.
We do split apply our nitrogen also. We put on about 40%. Well, it depends, I shouldn't say that. If we need more tillers, we'll bump that up a little bit, but we do split apply our nitrogen. First green up, and then at about second node stage, we put on the bulk of our nitrogen.
I'm not real scientific either. I use my eyes. Jeff's the oddball out here, and we probably all should be doing this, but I don't count either. I look at the stuff. Something that's you mentioned it. You get these small tillers that are coming through. I think they rob a lot of nutrients that could be going towards that main ear or the tillers that are strong there. We split apply N. Also, I think this coming year, I think N early is going to be huge because everything got planted so late. So that early N application is going to be huge. The other thing I'm going to test a little bit this spring is putting a little bit of phosphorus on. Not much, just a few units of phosphorus to see if that can help them tillering, to get some more tillering action.
So I know we got a bunch more questions, but you led right into one of the next things I was going to bring up. And I've got more, but I want to ask the questions, or you guys to ask the questions. A lot goes into what makes up yield, and we are measuring all the yield components. We're not measuring the number of tillers in this project early on in the spring, but what we are doing is measuring the total number of stems at harvest. So we're not taking into account those that tiller out and then those that die off. And we know, most wheat crops will put out 8, 9 tillers, and then by harvest you're down to 5. So you lose those 3 to 4 tillers. At least that's some of the data that I've seen in some of the studies that we've done at MSU. But so the yield components are really important, and we're trying to identify, and we're doing a good job characterizing those. But we got like spikelets per head, seeds per spikelet, and then what's the 1,000 grain weight? Those are the 3 key, and then the number of heads per unit area. And all of those things are affected by those management things listed in blue on the bottom of that slide. So we are trying to get a better handle of what is going on, and I do have some information coming up a little bit later, and I'll show you where we are compared to where the Europeans are, and I think you'll find that interesting. So let's get back over here to Crit. Next question.
Not really a question, just to add to what they were asking about is we're shooting for 600 heads per square yard when you go to harvest. And the tillers that will make the most yield are the ones that come out in the fall. And so Typically speaking, we like to have 3 tillers coming into spring. Those are the fall tillers. And then we like to add at least 2 more to that to take it to get to that 600 heads per square yard to get maximum harvest. Now, this year, late planting, we got 1 big tiller coming out in the spring. What do? We have to use nitrogen to manage those tillers. And so you get a shot of nitrogen early on to develop those tillers, and then the second shot of nitrogen goes all to grain fill. So 600 heads per square yard is the target, and the only thing that we really have to manage those tillers with is nitrogen.
All right, I just put up some more data up here on here. You guys can look through that. It has some of the European targets that they're trying to hit on the bottom there. But let's go on to the next question.
Dennis, I'm Matt Waymeyer with Agrimax. I'm
Yes.
from Illinois, but as you scale this yen project, is each participant collecting their own manual data samples from the soil tests, the tissue tests, counting the number of spikelets, and then how are you asking growers to take the yield from that 1 acre increment? Can you walk through the logistics of that?
Yeah, sure. In fact, every grower is going to get a sample box that will look something like this, and it will have all the mailers, boxes, sampling instructions. They are going to do it themselves this year. Last year we did it, but I have too many farms over a large geographic area. I can't get to every farm right at Feek 6 and at Feek 9 and so on. So they are going to have to do the sample collection. There will be prepaid mailers, so it won't cost them anything. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible for them to do the sample collection themselves. These boxes are almost ready to ship. The participants that are signed up now will get them in the mail probably next week, I would say. So yes, they're going to collect the soil sample, the 2 tissue samples. We got to collect a grab sample at harvest time where they clip off stems from 10 areas within the harvest area, and they'll ship them in the bigger box back to me. Then we'll process them, and also a grain sample. So all of that is going to be done by the farm this year. We got a webinar on Friday where we're going to talk a little bit more about how to collect that, how to determine when to collect it and how to collect those samples. And then we also have some videos that we're working on that will be posted on the website. We have a GreatLakesYen.com website about how to do it. So we're trying to get resources up there, but we got to have them collect it because you guys are in your fields regular. I can't get to the fields in time to keep track of all them. So the growers will be doing it.
I'm sure I can speak for the Saginaw Bay region because that's the area I cover, but I'm sure your local extension educator would be happy to help. So if this is your first year or even maybe your second year getting started and it seems a little intimidating because taking sampling and sending everything in can be, it's okay to ask for help, and it will get us out on the farms and getting us involved in the yin project too because it's new for us as well. So
yeah, and we're also asking agronomists to help as well, because they know quite a bit about how to stage wheat and collect the samples, and because they do quite a lot of that. So we're trying to keep the agronomists engaged with the growers as much as we can. For the yield part of it, you mark out a 1.5 acre area, and that's the area where I do all the sampling. I want all the sampling done within that small area, and then we harvest that and have to get a grain weight, and we have to have somebody like their local extension person or whoever sign off on it, that what the weights were and so on to get the official yield. So that's a quick highlight of how it works. Data entry will be also done by everybody. We are currently developing a new app that hopefully will make things a lot easier for doing the data entry. So we have to do that as well. We got to collect all that information from the growers too. So if you're participating, there's a fair amount of work in here, plus there's a $250 cost. But we're spending over $300 just in laboratory analysis, and that doesn't count all the labor and everything else for doing your yield component samples, the crop modeling, generating the reports, doing the networking and so on. So this isn't a cheap program to do, but I think it's valuable enough. We're trying to get sponsors, and we've had some success there too to get some sponsors to help with this program. So did that cover kind of the overview? Do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so a little bit with that. I mean, there's, in total, I maybe had 2 days total of, you know, data entry and things like that. You've got to put in all of your nitrogen, when you applied it, phosphorus, you know, all those sort of things. So if I spent 2 full days of data entry, you know, the tissue samples and things, which this year might be a little bit more because Dennis did most of that all last year, but so it's a little time consuming, but you know, the end results, you get a lot of stuff back. You know, I mean, we got a booklet back of data, you know, and there's a lot of stuff there, and I think Dennis only gave us half of it, you know, of the data points that you collected. We maybe got half of that stuff back just because there's just so much and you get overwhelmed.
Where are we at? We got questions? You got one back here?
Are any of you, or do you know of anybody that uses a drill where you can singulate the seed better than these box drills?
Yeah, we tried a singulator drill, gosh, 3-4 years ago. It was a horse drill, and I believe it's still down the university, the drill?
It's actually in Illinois now.
It's down in Illinois, okay. It was 6 centimeters, 5 inches. I can't remember now.
5 or 6 inches, I think.
6 inches, okay. Anyway, we did some trials on our farm. Dennis does some work too at the university, and the singulator system on the horse drill needs some perfection on it. It was getting seeds caught, and it would grind up the seed, split the seed in half, and so it's not a refined system yet. But we really reduced seeding rates. You know, you plant 1.5 inches apart when it would work. In our farm, the yield difference was very similar on yield, but the frustration with the planter is not quite there yet. But that could be a future for sure.
So we have looked at a couple of different types of singulation systems, and I've got some research that we've done in the past years on it. We use that horse system that Jeff was talking about. That uses centrifugal force. It's got electric motors that spin these discs at a high rate of speed, like 3,100 RPMs, because that horse drill was intended to be planting at 8, 9, 10 mile an hour. So imagine if you're planting at 10 mile an hour, how close you have to put seed down, how fast that thing has to spin in order to drop the seed properly in the furrow. So that centrifugal system where only one seed could hit the pocket as it spun around and dropped, we kept cracking seed and it would plug up basically with seed debris. The other thing we looked at was a monosome system that has a vacuum plate planter, and we were able to do a decent job with singulating, although we're not anywhere near where you can singulate with corn and beans with wheat. It's because we have to plant such high populations. If you can narrow that row spacing up, if you go from 7.5 inch down to 5 inch row spacing, keep the population the same, you can spread that distance apart between seeds, and that will impact your tillering, and it'll impact your yield components and all that stuff. So there's a lot to be done with this building a crop canopy and seeding rates and row spacings and all of that stuff, and we're looking to get into more of that. But basically the technology is really not quite there to do a 100% accurate job of spacing seed that close together with wheat. Question?
On the track of planting, what, for a no-till system specifically, is there a recommended depth, like a preferred, or like a really yield-enhancing depth that you have found? 1 1/4, 1.5 is kind of the recommendation right now.
Yeah, do you guys have a comment on that, or you want me?
I haven't messed with it a whole lot on planting depth. You know, I stick to that, you know, 1 to 1.5 inches, depending on obviously maybe soil temperature and time of year a little bit. Might change that a little bit, but I stick to that, you know, 1 to 1.5 inches.
We have got a planting depth study going. We've got 1 year of data. We also have a 2nd year of it planted now. We're planting 1/2 inch, 1.5, 2 inch, or 1/2 inch, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, I think, is the 4 depths. And the 1.5 has been the best so far. But in terms of determining that depth, that 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches is probably your optimum. And the reason is because wheat has crown roots. The crown roots or brace roots on corn, emerge above the soil surface and help provide anchorage for that stalk so it doesn't lodge. Well, the same thing is true. Wheat is a grass crop also, but those emerge at or below the soil level. If you plant shallow enough, those will emerge right at the soil level and not really do much to help that stalk stay upright and not lodge. So you got to get it planted deep enough so that those roots, those crown roots come out, 1/2 inch below the soil surface. Then you'll get a lot better anchorage and a lot less risk of lodging. And we've tended to shallow it up in the fall, the later you get, just because you want to see it get up out of the ground, but you might be doing yourself a disservice because you're going to impact the development of your root system. Your root system won't develop as good. You'll be better off having it emerge later, but having a good root system than trying to get it emerged more quickly. I had a question here, and then we'll go over there.
There's a couple over here.
Oh, a couple over here, okay.
Who was first, or?
Pick one.
Yeah. Is your participants always separate your herbicide with your nitrogen application?
Yes. We never put it together.
I spread dry. I might be changing that a little bit too.
Mine's always split. Herbicide is all on its own, possibly with a fungicide or a foliar feed at that time.
Yeah, so you can do some pretty good burn on wheat and when you're spraying for herbicide because you have to use those flat fan nozzles. You can't drizzle it on like you can when you're spraying 28% for nitrogen. So yeah, anything you can do to avoid injuring that plant, the better off you're going to be. So you had another question here?
We actually have two, because I'm going to steal his second. Is this going to have an interface where, because we have a lot of great questions going on here, will there ever be an interface where, depending on the question you have, you can like toggle some boxes and see what the data spits? I know that's really advanced, but I was just curious.
No, that is exactly where we want to go. Okay. And this new app that we're developing will allow the grower and their agronomist to log in and turn on and turn off and say, well, I want to see this data point, I want to see that data point, and well, let's sort it by yield, and then I want to look for variety, or sort it by yield, and I want to see what their planting depth was. And so, yes, we will be building that in the system.
My question is this: I keep hearing planting rate and seed spacing and canopy seems to be coming to forefront here, and I've heard anywhere from 7.5 to 5 inch row spacing. So the question I have is row spacing become critical in the yield potential because you're narrowing up row spacing to create a canopy with your 1.5 or 1.8 seed population to control your weed pressure in the spring? Is this something, and I'm curious what these three gentlemen up here, are they using 7-inch spacing, are they using 5-inch spacing, or is there really a percentage difference one way or another here in yield and or canopy?
I'll let you guys go first.
So ours is 5. We, about maybe 7-8 years ago, we started messing around with, we had a 7.5-inch no-till drill, and when you did the cross seeding on the headlands, yield monitor always went up. So we started cross seeding fields, half-rate cross seeding. Yields went up. Well, we don't want to do that forever because that takes forever. So we actually bought a Amazon drill that was also 5-inch. And when we did 2 years of studies on our farm, comparing the two, sold the John Deere drill, kept planting with the Amazon, then we switched to the Pottinger because the Amazon was only 12 foot wide, and planting 500 acres at 12 foot at a time takes a while. So the Amazon bigger drill was priced way out of the market, and so we went with the Pottinger. But we believe there's 5 to 15% yield bump going from 7.5 to 5-inch rows. That's information from our farm. Now, this last year we did with Michigan State University, we did a trial, and we had 5 different seeding components, or seeding methods, let me change that. We had 5-inch rows R drill versus 7.5-inch rows conventional tilled versus 7.5-inch rows no tilled versus a joker with a Valmar seeder on it, basically just spreads it on, lightly incorporates it, versus Dennis's monosim planter. Did I get them all?
On 5-inch row spacing,
On
yes.
5-inch row spacings. It's 10 inches, but he double planted it.
Yep.
On there. And that was randomly replicated 4 times. And the drill, or this plot was replicated how many places in Michigan?
I think we had 5 locations scattered across the state, doing not exactly the same with the exact same equipment,
Okay.
but similar.
Okay. So our results from our plot pretty much told us, sell all the drills, get the joker. Not anything like what we had anticipated. Because we were thinking what you're thinking, narrow rows is getting more yield. We were seeing that. But this plot, and I think Dennis's other plots too, showed that the wheat had a great capability of compensating how it was laid out there. Now, we don't know, we think maybe because they were all planted fairly early. Obviously, the earlier planting, the better tilling in the fall. So, did that have something to do with it? So maybe we need to look at a late planted plot with these different planting methods.
Which we have this fall.
All right,
We
which
have one
Dennis
late
has. We
planted
don't
now.
have that drill, or we don't have that plot this fall. But, yeah, it just confused us even more, so. With all them drills, we just 1 year with that.
But we're repeating that study again this year on 5 farms. So, yeah, the plan is to do this 3 or 4 years and see. And so we've been looking at this row spacing and, the accuracy of placing seedment with the seed singulation and that kind of thing. And we're finding that if you plant narrower rows, you can space those seeds a little farther apart and still maintain your same populations. We're seeing some yield benefit. So if we just let's just randomize it, like you do with broadcasting it on with a Valmar seeder. You can't control your depth that way, and we're finding the variability in planting depth is all over the board with the broadcast incorporated, but you're getting that random placement, so you're actually increasing the space between all those seeds. And last year, that broadcast incorporated yielded the same at every location as all of the drilled plot. The monosim planter on the 5-inch yielded higher than all of them, but compared to the drills, Broadcast Incorporated did the same, but they were all planted early. I think if we're planted late, I would be a little more worried about the Broadcast Incorporated.
Dennis, do you think it's because the root development was different? It might have been accessing like different nutrient pools and, kind of spaced it out as far as the demand?
For the Broadcast Incorporated? Yeah, so I don't know exactly what happened there. We collected all of our yield component samples and whatnot, so we can characterize, did we increase number of heads per unit area or spikelet count or 1,000 kernel weights, all that stuff. But yeah, I don't know why but it did very well.
I think one of the interesting thing too, like over in Europe, well, one of the things we did, you have to take a picture. They want a picture from overhead of the wheat, so you can see straight down. Can you see the ground or not through this wheat? So how much sun is that wheat capturing? And I think that's a huge thing, is how much sun capture does this wheat really pick up? And the more you can space them seeds out, they're gonna collect more sunlight that way.
What was the gate setting on that spreader? Do you know?
We actually calibrated them, and we did different populations at different farms. So we had from 1.2 million seeds per acre up to, I think we did one farm had 1.2, 1.6, and 2 million seeds per acre, and there was no difference at that farm between those populations on the Broadcast Incorporated. Let's go here, and then I got one over here. If you want to bring a microphone. Oh, you got one back there? I'm sorry. Yeah. Catch the one in the-
His question was, how does a non-participant view this information and data?
Well, that's a challenge. Non-participants are not able to access it. If you want the data, join up, sign up. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. These guys that are part of this have put all the sweat equity into it, and they're paying the registration fee to get this information. I don't feel that it's right for us to just share it with everybody else that isn't doing it. So, okay.
A few years ago, we was just messing around. We mixed some wheat seed with some fertilizer, put it on with an air seeder, and worked it in with a Phillips rotary harrow. And I have known bushels, whatever, but it was impressive enough. Why buy a drill? Because it just barely mixed in the soil. You got your fertilizer and everything on at one time, and it turned out very impressive. And my other question, but it's been kind of solved. In Europe, I understood the wheat rows were very narrow. I don't know if I read where it's 3-inch, but I knew it was very narrow compared to our 7.5s, and they pretty much answered that.
Yeah, they are trying to go to narrower in Europe. Did you have?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. In Ontario, they've done a bunch of work with mixing the seed and the phosphate together, putting it down the same furrow, and seen some very positive yield responses to that. We have that plot. We started this last fall, and so we should have some good data from that on our farm too. But having that phosphorus right next to the seed, and it really didn't seem to matter. I got to be careful here of what your soil tests were. They were seeing some response even if you had decent phosphorus levels on your soil test.
Yeah.
So something to take a look at. I don't know, does the university have any of those?
Yeah, we did some phosphorus studies. We did broadcast incorporated of the fertilizer as well as in the furrow. And we got a bump when we put the phosphorus on, even when the soil test levels were adequate. But it didn't really matter whether the phosphorus was in the furrow or broadcast incorporated. As long as you had the phosphorus there, it didn't matter. In Ontario, they will say you got to put it in the furrow every time. Question?
Yeah, 50 plus years.
Yeah, you're good.
50 plus years ago, doing pickle research at Michigan State, when the mechanical harvesters were just coming out, we definitely proved equidistance planting was the way to go. Trouble is with you folks is we don't have that equipment that the vegetable people have.
All right, how are we doing? Any other questions at this time? We're approaching break time. I had a couple of other things. Do you want to see some of the other results? I don't know if we want to spend a lot of time talking about it. These were the top 10 yields and the varieties of those, so you can look through them. Anybody have any comments about them? You can see what our highest yield was, 152.8. That was last year, and those top 3 are from Ontario. A bunch of the top ones are Pioneer, yes. And there's some red wheats, there's some white wheats in there. There's some seed companies here that may want to have you guys enter some of their lines. Any other comments about that? All right. One of the things that we were looking at is boron also. We pulled tissue samples, and 14 out of the 18 farms in Michigan at the early tissue sample test came back deficient in boron. And so you can see the red box there highlights the sample report, and right underneath the actual number for the farm, it shows the minimum and maximum for the normal range from A&L Labs, 6 to 10 parts per million on the boron, and you can see we had several farms that were deficient in boron. Anybody have any comments about that? Are you guys putting boron on? In the back? Okay, yes, we're putting boron on. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
I guess my results are similar. My tissue samples are always deficient in boron, and I've put it on lots of different ways, and I don't know that I've ever seen a very good response.
Seen a yield response? Mm-hmm.
Do you have an answer for me?
Well, so when Jeff and I went to Germany, one of the things that we learned is that they're applying as many as 3 applications of boron, with the first one being in the fall. And boron is involved with development of the, when the meristematic tissue converts to reproductive. So, you know, when that crown is growing, it's the meristematic tissue is putting out new leaves as it continues to grow. At some point, which is growth stage 5, it converts to reproductive and it starts to develop the head, okay? Boron is involved in that growth stage. So if you're deficient in boron at that early stage, it can impact how that spikelet, or the spike is developing inside by the growing point. But that's clear back, that's when the growing point is right at the soil surface. So I think maybe we're not seeing a response because we're not getting boron applications on early enough. Maybe we need to have it in the fall so that there's adequate in the spring. Do you have a comment, Jeff?
I think the most important part of a tissue sample is when you pull it. And it reaffirmed when in the Yen program, they pulled tissue samples twice. First, when the plant was real small, I'm going to say maybe 6, 8, 10 inches high, and we had good growing conditions, good soil moisture, and the results come back, things were in line pretty good. The second time when they pulled it, when the plant was about the flag leaf or maybe a little bit later, it was very dry when they pulled that sample, and our results come back deficient in everything. And it's because you can have all the nutrients you want in your soil, but if you don't have good soil moisture, the roots can't intercept it, take it up into the plant. So the most important part of the tissue sample is you have good growing conditions when you're pulling the sample. Otherwise, you'll show a deficiency in everything and think that, oh man, I got everything screwed up, and you may not.
I guess to add to that, I mean, at our house last year, we didn't really have good growing conditions. It was cold and dry for 2.5 months. Should we have not sampled, or should we put extra nutrients on there because we know we're not taking up very well in these bad conditions?
I kind of have a comment to that, actually, that we found out with soil health testing.
I missed the question.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm sorry
Well,
about that.
if you don't mind me jumping in,
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of like you got to pick one or the other. You consistently test at the same time and then try to understand maybe that environment and how it impacted, or you try to control, like you test for those same conditions and then understand that the timing is, you got to pick your battle when it comes to sampling. And so it's never going to be perfect, but unfortunately that's just how research goes. That's not a great...
And one thing regarding the tissue sampling, we're using it as more of a diagnostic tool after the fact, not necessarily to make in-season decisions. We're going back and we're looking at, okay, did we get our nutrients into the crop early? Were we deficient on anything? Was it there at flag leaf? So are we still good and we're not deficient on anything at flag leaf? And then when we submit the grain sample, what ended up in the grain? Do we have adequate nutrition in that grain, or were we deficient? So we're trying to identify kind of post de facto what happened in the last season. And if you were deficient at something somewhere along the way, that may be something we want to address next year.
I don't want to sound too nerdy, but then through statistics, you'll be able to block for some of those other variables so that you know that it happened because of this or that. So you kind of just got to pick one way and go with it.
So we need to get into break here, but these have been excellent questions. You've covered a lot of the stuff that I'm going to get into a little bit more detail here after the break about some of the results and stuff that we learned in this project. But let's thank these 3 gentlemen here for sitting on this panel, and Dave's got a little handout for you.
Thank you.
As we enter into break, in the back of the room, there's